This is Andrea Longton.
This is Leah Freemouth.
And this is Ebony Perkins. And we are Renegade Capital.
All views expressed in this podcast are our own. We are not financial planners, investment advisors, or tax advisors. The views that we have on this show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the people who sign our paychecks. So please keep that in mind and always consult a trained financial professional before you start moving your hard-earned money. Let's dive in. Gosh, it's been a long time since I've led this. Ebony, you've led all of them up until this season, so I'm like, how do we get started? But one thing that stuck out to me when Lakota and I were chatting in our pre-conversation was she was talking about MacGyvering money. And I use that phrase a lot about, how do we MacGyver something into doing what we need to do? And so that really stuck out, and that's what's coming out to me. And Ebony, when I was talking to you about it, you said, okay, that sounds great, but what exactly does that mean, to MacGyver something?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I never watched that show ever in my life. So I don't know MacGyver. I don't know his first name. So yeah. Introduce me.
Does he have a first name? He has a mullet. I know that.
I want to say it's Angus. It is. It's Angus MacGyver. It was on a TV show that ran from 1985 to 1992 and it was called MacGyver.
Yeah, no, I was only here for 2 years in that period.
I've never saw the show, but just the term MacGyver is part of my daily life. Like, I still use it all the time. But he was a secret agent he was known for relying on his brain, scientific prowess, duct tape, and a Swiss Army knife to save the day. And so it coined this term to MacGyver something, and it's to make or repair an object in an improvised or inventive way, making use of whatever items are conveniently at hand. And whenever I Googled it, I'm like, so what's an example of MacGyvering? Because, of course, my brain was totally blank of what an example could be. And it was like, when you use a log to makeshift car jack and get the tire off the ground, I'm like, well, that's great. That's not really something that I would do. So I was thinking about, like, what are everyday MacGyvering things that I do. And so, like, when we have leftover grease in a pan when I'm cooking, I'll use, like, aluminum foil to make a cup in the sink. And then pour the grease into that so that it doesn't go down the sink and, destroy the drains. Because I am really not handy. And so duct tape is my best friend. I'm MacGyvered up some speakers under my deck this summer with like these old speakers that were in somebody's attic. And I was like, I'll take those, and got some audio cables and this little device that I could cast my phone's music through it. But then it was outside. And it wasn't really meant to be outside, and it rains. And so I was like, how do I fix this? And so I stuck it into, I got like a waterproof compartment, which doesn't work if you leave holes in it. So I'm like, that's not going to work for me. And stuck it in a Ziploc bag. And then I was still like, I'm not sure. So I got an umbrella and stuck it over everything. And it worked. It was very good. So that is my MacGyvering examples of using one thing to just make it work. And get it done whenever you don't have the exact thing there for you. And I found it really interesting that Lakota was talking about how she at Forbands MacGyver's money to work for Indigenous people living within her community and the community that Forbands serves. And so I'd love to learn more from her about how she's MacGyvering money, how she's making this work. And so my question for y'all is, with that context and background, are there things that you MacGyver financially in your own lives or physically, if you have an umbrella trick that you have? Are there any examples that y'all have of how you MacGyver money or other things in your own life?
One thing that I do around my mortgage is I never pay my mortgage in full.
Really?
And I know that sounds weird. I cut my mortgage in half. And I pay it over, like if I get paid twice a month, I will pay, half of it at the beginning of the month, and then half of it, like when the rest of it is due. I don't know what it is. I don't like seeing a large sum come out of my account at once. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put a little something on it. And then to make sure that, when the time has come, it's fully paid. I mean, granted, that means I have to be like at least half of a payment ahead. But I just, if something happens and I need that sum, I'll have it available. I never want my account to get below a certain amount. And granted, there are other ways to go around it, but I'm just like, okay, how am I going to work it so that Truist, like, they know it's coming. They don't have to keep sending me notices like, hey, you owe whatever. But I'm like, nah, I'm going to have to rig this so that it also doesn't affect my credit score.
I like that.
I can totally understand the mental things, like I do some of the same things, whether I pay off my credit card balance in full, what it's going to do to that kind of minimum savings account, that line that I like to see. It's not rational. It's just, I like that number to look a certain way.
I can sleep better at night. Yep.
I think the concept of MacGyvering is interesting because I remember that the joke is like MacGyver would use a ballpoint pen and some duct tape and be able to like save like a whole school bus of children and put a fire out. It's kind of like the bare essentials of tools, but big problem solving. And I hadn't thought about it in that context where at Bridging Virginia, because we're so small and I know, and my director of ops and even our underwriters, we all know each deal. And so as we get feedback from the underwriter, Michelle and I will sit down and say, and the underwriter said, per policy, this would not be approved, but here are some things that you can ask about. And then it could be a responsible yes. Right. So we always want to be responsible to the business owner, like as far as setting them up for success and not just like throwing debt at them. But like that kind of like problem solving. So, okay, so they don't have this in place yet, but if we can add maybe this guarantor, or they pay off these 3 small credit cards, and then, like that kind of maneuvering within each deal is kind of fun and reminds me. And in fact, I've pulled myself out of the relationship management with the clients because I need to be able to come in from the third party, if you will, and kind of, brainstorm around how we get to a yes, or how, if it's not a right now. The other thing that I think is kind of telling and kind of fits that story is the underwriters that we use, the Olia Group. She helped us develop our credit policy for the small business lending we do. And even as we're developing these policies, the underwriter, myself as CEO, and our board chair, we coined ourselves team policy exception because as we're going through, like, okay, we don't want to do this, but what if, the business owner actually does flip real estate? And that's what they did. And it was like, well, policy exception. Cool. Like, because we were always like, we need structure, but we also need the flexibility to, use these small tools to kind of solve the problem. Because I don't know. So I'm really excited to talk to her and hear more about the MacGyvering and maneuvering that they're able to do.
I think that is really renegade, where you're like, okay, this is the standard, this is the policy, this is what we need to do, this is what everybody says is the right thing to do. But how can we work around this? Because we want to be responsible to our borrowers and our communities. And how can we make this work a little bit differently? What provisions can we put into place here? What can we think about as far as credit worthiness? What can we think about like repayment and fixing those amortization schedules so that it works for the borrower? I think that's very renegade to figure out how to have a creative problem solving.
Well, and even like the language that we put in policy different than like, so some of it has to be very specific. And then some of it can be, on a case by case basis, or this is required as needed per, the deal. So just having more generic language in some of the policy areas is helpful to like, I like to say we have a box, but we can like kind of bump around in the box a little bit,
Y'all have good examples. I was gonna bring a $3 Pizza Friday to the table.
No, wait, to go on. Pizza? Hold on, don't stop.
So mine is very small, where every Friday at my son's school is Pizza Friday, but you have to bring $3. It's every week. It's like, how are we gonna get $3 bills into George's backpack the day before? Because we don't use cash, and so my MacGyvering money was that we usually go to CVS the night before, and we have like a $20 bill, and we buy something for $1 and get the $3 and change back. That is my MacGyvering money, creative problem solving for how do we get $3 bills into Georgia school the next day. So, ta-da!
That is hilarious.
So, established in 2000, Four-Bands Community Fund is a community lender focused on Indigenous individuals, families, and small businesses. This nonprofit organization is a leading organization on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation specifically, and South Dakota generally, in the areas of small business development, business lending, financial literacy, and youth entrepreneurship. Today, we're talking to Lakota Vogel, who's the executive director at Four-Bands. In this role, Lakota provides leadership for the Community Loan Fund, establishes new and fosters existing partnerships, and leads and manages efforts to reach organizational goals. Before she was the executive director, Lakota served as the assistant director for 5 years. She had graduated from the University of Notre Dame. I always want to say Notre Dame. We'll take that back. She graduated from the University of Notre Dame with a bachelor's degree in sociology. And at graduation, she joined Teach for America and taught on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation at Todd County High School. She went back and obtained her master's in social work from Washington University in St. Louis, where she individualized her course of study to concentrate in economic security and social development through the life course of American Indians. We're really excited to have Lakota on today to talk about her experience and expertise.
This is Ebony Perkins.
This is Leah Freemow.
This is Andrea Longton, and we are Renegade Capital. Today, we're talking with Lakota Vogel about financing opportunities in America's Indigenous communities. Renegade Capital Podcast is proud to be sponsored by U.S. Bancorp Impact Finance, a subsidiary of U.S. Bank, which is an industry leader in providing financial solutions that help create positive impact for communities and the environment. For 35 years, its tax credit investments in syndications, lending, and other financial solutions have helped create affordable housing, spur economic activity in underserved communities, restore historic buildings, develop renewable sources of energy, and strengthen community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, nationwide. Learn more at usbank.com/impactfinance. So, Lakota, thank you so much for joining us today. We are really excited to have you. By way of introduction, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to lead Four-Bands?
It's always like a roundabout way about the story of how I came to lead Four-Bands. I've always been attracted to fields of study interest that challenge me or, give some sort of challenge. So basically, started out at the University of Notre Dame and then moved wanting to return home. So I grew up on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in north central South Dakota. I am a Cheyenne River Sioux tribal member. Went to the university, but when you travel that far away from home, I really was looking for a place to go back. And so I joined the Teach for America Corps, and it wasn't my goal to be a teacher at all, but I think the way that the presenter was recruiting, he actually had a star in the state of South Dakota at that time. And I was very interested to know that a Corps at a national level was interested in the state that I came from, and specifically Native American community. So was challenged to go after and learn more. And as a teacher, while I was there, I was very interested in special needs students. So I actually did special education, and I really enjoy different perspectives of how they see the world. And so then I was noticing rural communities weren't set up very well for their transition out of high school into the community, and was just asked a lot of questions of why that is and just how unfair that is and unjust. And so I wanted to seek my master's in social work to explore ways to support students with mental health needs in rural communities. And while I was there was a professor that talked about gerontology and how she just nobody it takes a special person, is what she said, to work in gerontology. And I myself like had a lot of strong elders in my life and really enjoyed learning about older individuals. So the whole issue, going into my master's, I basically just individualized and was like, look, if a rural community can be set up to support the whole spectrum, the whole life spectrum of young adults with, special needs all the way to older adults, I think a community is set up right to take care of its membership. And so kind of just individualized it. And as I was doing that, interviewed a leader back home and talked to her. I was really looking for a mentor at the moment, and she just had amazing grit, and I loved her responses. Her name was Tanya Fiddler, and from there she had a position open at 4Bands, and here I am, you guys.
We are so lucky that that's your journey took you there, because watching what you've done and seeing everything is just amazing.
So I got to ask, personally, I didn't know what a CDFI was until I started working for one. Did you know what you were getting into?
I did not. No, you're right. I've heard asset development, and was like, assets. I know that. I've heard that a little bit at the social work courses that I took, but getting into I think one of my first days on a job, I had to create a presentation about what a CDFI was, and I had to Google it.
Well, what does it mean to you to be a local lender focused on Indigenous communities? What have you learned since you started at 4Bands?
Yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily, it's the perspective. So it's like the lens in which that I work within my community. And I think having a broad spectrum of the word community first is important. And we lead with that. The lender part of it is never what we lean into. So that's what I like about being a community lender, is like when a client or a borrower approaches us, it's not about the lending side of it. It's really community focused. So that's my first response.
So if you are thinking about community first and you are a loan fund, what role do you play in your community? How do you see that role as it crystallizes?
So I will be clear with the listeners that only 13% of the Native American population is actually on reservations in the United States. And so it's a very small, unique space for my expertise. But growing up there and within a reservation based economy, we have developed an expertise within that space. And it took us actually 20 years to even understand what our expertise was and identify what we're uniquely capable of. It's kind of like the analogy of I can run, I'm physically able to run, but would I define that as a strong capability of mine? No, And I think 4Bands in 23 years can do a lot of things because we've got great talent, and we've had to define that so that I'm not asking my team to go do pumpkin patch giveaways because we can do that and we have, but finding and honing in on what we're uniquely capable of and just growing that. And that strategy has been the hardest because when you're in a rural town, there's a lot of asks of you. We can do a lot of things. We're well resourced, and you want to go do the pumpkin giveaway at Halloween, but keeping your strategy focused is fun, but it's also hard because there's a lot of needs.
So the kind of the legal and sovereign structure of a reservation, and you said reservation-based economy. Just so we have I mean, I know there's a lot of depth that you could go into, but could you set stage around that for us and our listeners, and how that is unique relative to the other states?
It's a very complex history with American Indians in the United States history, so I'll spare you the details with that. But I think the way that when I speak about it, I think that it's about a boundary setting, like a literal physical boundary setting that has been done in treaties at the federal level. So it's positioned my tribe and others in the United States as a federal to federal relationship, which allows us to, have different jurisdictions. So like during COVID, for example, our tribe, Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, was able to control its boundaries, which is the size of Connecticut. So my tribal chairman was able to make a ruling about not leaving those boundaries, and there are physical boundaries on the map, and different things can happen within those boundaries. So as an organization leader, I have have different levels of government to respond to, and first and foremost is the tribal government and federal, and then state government and local government. So it's interesting. It's a lot of jurisdictions to understand, but I think growing up here, it's something that's been integrated into our lifestyle, and that's why Forbands is sort of uniquely positioned to understand all those systems. There is with lending, it's very important with the trust land status. So there's not a clear title usually within reservation boundaries for clear title to land, which, as we know as lenders, it's one of the largest assets that any individual can use to leverage to get access to capital. And it's been locked up in this status of trust land for centuries.
And so from a lender standpoint, I'm asking clear and pure ownership of property is gray. And so how have you all moved your credit boxes or even not had collateral as part of a credit box for your lending practices?
It's taken a while to get there because, well, first we started off by not lending on trust land, just like everybody else in the nation, just because it was too gray for us to dip into. So if we did it, we just did fee simple land on the reservation, which that also exists. So actually, in the past 10 years, we've discovered that it's really a manufactured system, which is fair, right, in the government. So it was some system in the 1700s that was manufactured by a group of white men, and it has stayed that way and has limited the growth and development of our nations for that long. And so Forbands just continued to ask, and we just upheld curiosity and asked why. Why? Why can't you collateralize trust land? Let's look into this. And we tried it because, as you know, as CDFIs, we can get capital that isn't regulated from the, sort of federal standpoint as a bank. And so we were able to just take a risk or a perceived risk and lend on trust land and go through the same systems and collateralize it in the way that we felt comfortable as a lending institution. And it worked. And ever since it worked, we've been on this train of advocating nationally that banks need to take that out of their narrative completely. It's a false narrative, it's hurtful, and it's unjust, and it's being said over and over, and it's a difficult thing to do. If you imagine you're trying to find not just large bank institutions or financial institutions, you're finding the loan officers, because an institution could take it out of their language, but then you've got to find the loan officers that have been trained, that are repeating it over and over. So it's untangling a narrative that has been said for centuries that's just false.
Of those deals that have trust land involved, how many are in, slow play or like in watch? How many have charged off or are in kind of a delinquent status?
We don't categorize our portfolio that way, but out of, 7 million this year that we've deployed, I mean, I'll just give you general numbers, and 80% of it was on trust land or in some way, because we're doing mortgage lending now, and our delinquency in that portfolio is 3%. So I don't know exactly by trust land, but the delinquency of just lending to Native Americans within this setting is not risky at all. And we've been screaming that as well. Yeah.
Again, back to your, it's perceived risk. It's not real risk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we dig in on that a little bit more? Because, Lakota, one thing that I've heard you speak about a couple of times is a regression analysis that you ran on your portfolio of, what are the right indicators of creditworthiness. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So once again, not a lender by training, and every one of us adopted a lending framework, right? That when you start or work at a CDFI, somebody hands you a risk rating sheet and says, here's how you should judge risk in your community. And I think it's fine. It's just a framework for analyzing it. But we really reflected on it after a lot of just wanting to know, are we accurately predicting risk in our portfolio? We were noticing, when you fill out an application, people would struggle to fill out collateral and equity. Those were always the largest ones that was a heavy lift for our borrowers, and understandably, but we couldn't ever justify to ourselves in our sort of majority mindset training that it was okay to remove those from the risk rating. So we just did a quick study. I mean, it was a regression analysis on 101 of our small business loans. And we did a look back and said, well, of those 5 credit factors that we were looking at, which ones were predicting risk? And so, big reveal, the things that predicted risk and the way that we judged them was not owner's equity, was not debt coverage ratio, was not collateral coverage ratio. It was actually the borrower's commitment to business, their credit score, and their character score. So I want to just belabor the point a bit, because commitment to business and character score are kind of quality indicators that my loan officers are making subjective judgments about. Those in any industry are difficult to be quantitative, but we are getting there. So forbearance, after realizing that character score and commitment to business was our biggest predictors of risk and how we're judging them, all I can say is we're doing it accurately, because they're accurately predicting the risk. And what we look for in those instances are things like, if the borrower has a narrative of saying, I am going to get into business. And when you ask them the questions like, well, what would happen if things didn't go in the way the market didn't pick up on your idea? And they have an end to their story. They reach a trajectory. And if they can say in words to you, like how their story ends, usually their character score will go up, right? Because we know they've thought about it, they've got a way out, etc. So it's not perfect, but I feel good about the team that I've assembled, the culture of my organization that we've worked on over the years to have the right people in the right seats to be judging those indicators, but we are going to get better at defining them.
Well, the proof's in the pudding too, right? Whenever you have a 3% delinquency rate. Talk to me about, when you are training your staff and your team on how do you look at a character-based lending, or how do you look at commitment to business? I know you said you're getting closer to it. What do those conversations look like? How do you explain that or train that?
It's hard to say, because I've had a really strong lender lead in my director of lending, and she's been the one training. But you know how it is at small rural organizations. We luckily haven't had a lot of turnover, but this is why we're analyzing it now and trying to hone in on it. So really it is about not giving somebody a framework and saying, here's your orientation package to being a lender in our community. Instead, it's more, let's sit down side by side and look at this deal, talk to the borrower together, work on the relationship, and ask the right questions. And so it's a slow uptake, which is a criticism of the work and hard to hire, because it does take 6 to 12 months to train in, but it's worth it, basically.
Can you say more about the credit score? I'm part of a loan fund that our credit policy is character-based, and we don't have a minimum credit score, but we do pull credit, and it has influenced our business coaching, and kind of getting them ready or not for loans. But I personally always kind of wondered about the black box of credit and how it's systemically, it's built on racist kind of paradigms and but it still measures stuff that's quantitative.
So forbearance in our community, this is our financial institutions do not report to the credit bureaus. So, jumping into this work, did not know that they had a choice, right?
They don't have a choice. They can't report up to the credit bureaus?
They just don't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I didn't know the institutions didn't have a choice. And so basically, the reason is we're an ag-based community, and so their annual payments generally, like many of the local banks, were based on ag lending, and so annual payments don't, it's just harder to report. So they still aren't, though. It's 2023, and our community is needing to report. So the only reason I'm leaning into credit score is forbearance has built an entire programming around credit as an asset for 10 years. So if we hadn't done that previous work of building the financial acumen in our community and this momentum around credit as an asset and the importance of building that, and ourselves reporting to the credit bureau and watching the scores grow and talking to our community, I wouldn't get behind that credit score indicator. But that's why I feel good about it, is because it was a part of our strategy for the past 10 to 12 years of developing it within our community and talking to our borrowers about it. And that's why I believe it was such a high indicator for us, is because of that history. But I would caution, just like you're saying to everybody listening, please analyze that factor, because if your community hasn't had that support system around it, talking about credit as an asset, working on developing it, it is absolutely not fair to judge people just by that one indicator.
We started the conversation talking about, what forbearance is working on really sharpening its strategy and focusing on that strategy. What is your vision for the future? It's October, when we're recording this, it's October 2023. Lots been happening. What is your vision for the future? Where would, if everything else was ceteris paribus, to borrow an economic phrase, where would you like to go?
It's still on Shine River. So Shine River itself is like the state of Connecticut in land mass, but there's 10 to 12,000 people within that space. But it has a lot of potential, and there's still so much untapped potential in the years that I've been there. We have expanded, just so everybody knows, to the state of South Dakota to serve other borrowers in the state of South Dakota. There's only so many entrepreneurs within a 10,000 to 12,000 population. So we went beyond and have been serving Native Americans in the state of South Dakota, and that's been great. But I think what I would love to do and see Forbands do is become more of a developer of developing either home sites for borrowers for mortgages, like individual residential mortgages, or build buildings. We need new things. Like recently, we built a business incubator in 2019, and it was difficult to get capital to build something. But I believe, and we believe in our community, that we deserve new and nice things, and we need to build new things in our communities. And the hope and what that's done for our community to watch somebody build something new and say, wow, they're investing in us. This is a place to build things. I mean, we want to continue that narrative and watch that repeat itself, and not us be the only builders, but others. So we have purchased like 4.65 acres of land adjacent to our current building and want to continue to grow this incubation mindset where we give people an opportunity to test an idea in their market. And then it's a safe space where it's not a huge risk for them to start a restaurant and then fail, right? But allow them to test the market. That's my future vision.
Renegade Capital Podcast is proud to be sponsored by Self-Help Credit Union and Self-Help Federal Credit Union, which believe in the power of finance to transform lives and communities. Are you an impact investor looking to make a difference? Look no further than Self-Help, where your deposits can create positive change. Don't just invest for profit, invest for impact. Visit selfhelp.org/invest-for-impact today and start depositing into a money market or term certificate with Self-Help Credit Union, where your money can change lives. Self-Help Credit Union, ownership and economic opportunity for all.
Lakota, can you describe the Shine River area? Like, what are the people like? What is it like to live there? Paint a picture for me, because I've never been.
It's like knowing your neighbor everywhere you go, except your neighbor literally lives 5 to 10 miles away from you. But you still call them neighbor when you run into them, and you drive down the roads and you wave hi just because you're pretty sure that could be a auntie or uncle. And if you didn't wave, you might hear about it later that you didn't wave at them. And it doesn't have a lot of, so our anchor institutions are school systems, hospital systems. And when I mean anchor, those are our highest employment opportunities. So if you haven't made it into those, if you don't want to be a doctor or a nurse, or if you don't want to be a teacher or one of those services supporting teaching, or work in a political, like the tribal government, there aren't a lot of other opportunities for you to jump into. So we have, a high unemployment rate of 47%. But we have a lot of people wanting to stay. Our population pyramid is like upside down. So when we studied the population and did a household survey, the mode, like the most repeated age, was 1. Like families are growing. There's a very young population. 45% of the population is under the age of 18. So we've got a lot of potential. Yeah, we don't have the brain drain of people exiting. We've just got everybody wanting to stay, to live, to contribute. And now we need to build the systems so they can do that work. And it's slow going. Like doing small business lending is, we create 2.6 jobs per small business created, which is average across America, but it doesn't make that high impact change that is needed in areas that have been underinvested in, like mine. So
I've heard you speak about money as a tool that sometimes traditional financial institutions see through a lens of functional fixedness. So what does that mean? And can you talk a little bit about how Forbands uses money differently?
nations like mine, so I'll speak about the Lakota Nation, which is the tribe that I'm a part of, and the people, colonization impacted us, but we actually we didn't have a word for money. So in the Lakota language, there wasn't a word for money, and it actually had to get created. And so, colonization stunted the growth of my culture for a long time. And I think the exciting part about things now is we're reclaiming a lot of that. We're defining things differently. We saw money as a circulation of wealth versus accumulation of holding tight onto. And so that's what I love about the idea that I'm working at an institution that sees money as a tool, but we don't have predefined dogma around it. There's not a lot of principled thoughts about how money should be used, and it's exciting. So we know what the world says. Like, I can read books. I know how the world believes money should work. And so in general, something that exists in psychology is something called functional fixedness. It's like you see a tool, like a pen or money, and you've been using it and capitalizing on it for, decades, centuries, months, years, whatever your experience is with that tool. You begin to only see it for the one function it's designed for. But eventually, if you're just exposed to this tool, you can, like we said, MacGyver it, right? You can be like a MacGyver, and you see the pen as a tool to take two of them and stab them into the wall, and it becomes a holder for a shelf. Like, that's a simple example, but that's how I believe we view money, as a way and to we don't have these principles around it. So it's not necessarily that I can take money and color it purple and it becomes something different. I think it's more about the transaction of how it's exchanged. Um, we don't see it as like black and red in those, or, you have some and you don't have some. We know at Forbands that borrowers come to us without collateral, for example. So they've got to fill a gap, and usually that's a cash gap in the rest of the world. We don't care if that cash gap comes from the individual. Like, there is a principle around it where everybody says this kind of, I don't know, skin in the game, right? And it's sort of derogatory, but it's vulgar if you think about it. But we don't care if the borrower actually puts their cash in it. So Forbands is like, well, we can get cash for the borrower to put in for the loan to be, have the right LTV, so loan to value. So we do that. We fundraise for it. We see it as sort of like reparations of saying this person was stripped of their assets, decades ago because of colonization. I can get them a grant, buy them the equipment that'll close that gap, and their loan will be approved. So I think when I speak about it, we don't have that's the way that we MacGyver money in the simplest way. Yeah.
What is your favorite example of how Forbands has MacGyvered money in the past?
Well, some fun ones are just about the different the types of collateral that we've accepted. We had somebody that felt pretty passionately about like a geode, like some type of rock, and it does have value, but it was the way the customer talked about it and wanted to put it up as collateral, and so we accepted. It was, I can't remember the type of quartz it was, but it was an important quartz, and it was a big rock, and we actually had to find a safe for it to put it in there. But it was the way that the customer valued it that we knew that that's what we were looking for, was to mitigate the risk, is the value of that geode that this individual valued, right? So that was kind of funny, but it was funny, more funny listening to my loan officer looking at me like, what, how am I supposed to value this? And where are we going to store this?
I like that. I'm never going to be able to talk about MacGyvering something or functional fixedness without thinking about a very large geode sitting in a safe somewhere. But it's so true, because we all value something so much differently. So that one thing that has incredible value to me could mean nothing to you.
Well, and one thing I like, the visual I like, and I don't know if you guys watched, but it's parkour. Like, you remember the Office episode where you can like parkour all the things. So that's what I think we do sometimes when we're lenders working in communities. We see a different path and we parkour everything, right? And it's fun, and we're like jumping over things. And so if it's easier, I like to view ourselves as like parkour artists in the lending world.
If you had a magic wand, Lakota, like I know we all do, hanging around somewhere, what would you change about the movement of money within or around Indigenous communities?
Well, first, I think that there's something that needs to be acknowledged of just like demystifying, the culture a little bit. But I heard somebody mention that there's like this the white man rides in a cab disease, where somebody experiences the reservation and then has this idea, but they just ride around in a car and witness what their perceptions. And we sort of have that disease. It's, white man travels to the reservation disease and stays in their car, but then applies all these solutions that come in and don't work. So I think if I was going to change the movement of money, I would first ask the person I'm speaking to or the institution to sort of remove the centrality that they carry about their way being the right way. Um, it's you can feel it when somebody carries that centrality of like, this is the way that I expect it to, and then all we're viewed as is like a divergence from the norm. And so we're trying to break down that perception of like, actually the way that we're moving money is supported by the community. It's the way to do good lending in your community and support it. This is the point that you need to start from and then talk about ways to fit. So that's the first thing, is sort of breaking down the perceptions that they have before they begin moving money. And I think a magic wand would be that replicates without me having to say it constantly, that other people feel empowered to say those things, and that it changes, and it's just like this ripple effect that happens and whispers that carry across the nation. So that's my magic wand.
That's a good magic wand. Are you noticing a shift in that community centric, in that we need to listen to communities to find the solutions to the problems that we're working on?
I am noticing. Are you guys noticing it?
I am. I was at a workshop this morning, and it was on green finance. And I heard they had 6 different speakers, and every single one said we need to listen to the communities in which we're working. And they weren't your typical community development financial groups. They were focused on the environmental justice and climate justice. And so to hear that was really powerful for me. I went, oh, wow. Lakota's magic wand is working. Like it's trickling out there. And people are recognizing that it's important. And it's important if we want sustainable economies.
Lakota, I feel like there has been a lot of attention, which I think is good, but given towards Indigenous communities, especially like in the last few years, um, w- just in so many different ways, whether it's from a pop culture standpoint and like TV shows on Hulu, or if it's like I've seen models who are Indigenous starting to get a lot of recognition, and even like in the impact investing space, right? And having a lot more conversations at national conferences around it. Do you find that this attention has been helpful, or has it been a bit more harmful, speaking to what you said about the white man in the cab?
I personally find it helpful. I think, like I mentioned early on, I think as modern Native peoples, we're trying to define and decide what that looks like. And I'm looking for my peers in the space to continue this dialogue and engage with, because I need different voices in order to be woken up to the range of solutions that are out there. So to me, I find it helpful. Others might have different opinions, but that's my experience, and I'm excited to see where where it goes and what other leaders emerge with new thoughts. But just the idea that young, kids can watch Hulu now and watch like Reservation Dogs or any of the other ones and see themselves is really powerful. Just watching the youth and the response of seeing themselves in media has been important. It's not the only thing, but it's been really helpful. I just think, this whole idea of others wanting to come to reservation areas and witness, that is, I think, will always continue to happen, but we're just learning to engage with it in different ways and be more empowered with how I respond to that type of request.
What can our audience do? Like, how can we support Indigenous communities just in general?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just self-awareness, Googling it, just getting educated as much as you can, understanding there are 574-ish tribal nations in the United States. So everyone is different, but if you live in a state, most likely there's a tribal nation nearby you, at least within the state boundaries, and it's great to engage and understand the history. So I would just encourage everybody to brush up on American history through the lens of Indigenous perspectives, which there's a lot of information out there. So just do some browsing, and then after that, reach out, because oftentimes CDFIs do play that role. If we're operating within a reservation, we are sort of that go between, and we're happy to play that role. We think it's a valuable role. So if there is a Native CDFI in your area, I would just say reach out and ask what you can do. There's volunteering opportunities. There's being on a board. We always need board members, or even just advisory committees. If you have a special talent like accounting or marketing and digital media, we're always looking for support in those systems. So if that helps.
Do you accept investments, either from individual or institutional? What does that look like?
It looks like a relationship. I want to get to know you because sometimes you just have to reach out. We have a form, it's great, but I do want to make sure that the product that you want to support and what your goals are, supporting home ownership to business lending, it matches what you want to put your money into, but then it also matches the need that I have at my organization. And sometimes it's a not yet, and that's okay. It's instead supporting, like I said, in different ways of me reaching out to you and using some expertise that you have. But I do think that the relationship usually comes first with any type of individual investment or even institutional investment.
And at the end of every episode, Lakota, we encourage our audience to join the moment in the movement and become renegades. So how do you define a renegade?
I love it, because I was working on my introduction probably 4 or 5 years ago, and actually defined myself as a renegade social worker. And I think that
I love that.
I think when I said it, I was just thinking of myself riding a Harley. No, I'm kidding. But I think that I think that it's just about systems change and making sure that we do it boldly, and that even if our voice shakes, like RGB said, right, like we still speak loudly, and it's important. So I feel that in the social work space, and to always flex my courage. So I just never hide from things, just continue to build that courage muscle. And that's what being a renegade is.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
I think she's incredible. I've talked to her a few times over the years, and seeing how she thinks about just fundamental credit, and how she views community as always first in her mind, and building out an organization and their credit policies around community first. She is a role model of mine. I'm so glad that she was on Renegade Capital.
Everything you said, Andrea, it's just amazing. I love the non-banking, non-finance background, the social work background coming into the finance and community development space, and kind of the fresh eyes and perspective that has been able to be so additive and innovative and MacGyver-ish,
I think I really appreciate it, and I need to sit on it some more, but really understanding, like, viewing finance from a cultural perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing and recognizing that what may not be, a value to you may be everything to someone else. And how do we tailor um, our practices in a way that, this can still be very successful, even if it's not done in a traditional way. And it's successful because, our borrower said that, that geode and that rock is really important. And this is why. And I really respected that story, because to me it spoke to the cultural importance, and not trying to put everybody in one box. And I recognize, everybody may not be able to do that, or let me be clear, may not want to do that, but that has proven to be very successful. And every community is different. And they have shown us how to tailor your work in order to have the impact that you want to see.
Yeah. And to quote her, uphold your curiosity, that those two words, they upheld their curiosity, is how they figured out some of those things around their risk tolerance. And so that message of stay curious, stay open, flex your courage. I mean, so many little sound bites in there, but really just a simple way to kind of like internalize a practice and a way of being.
I agree. I think all of our eyes are opened a little bit further tonight after we recorded this. I liked your word, Leah, that we've reset and thinking about that again. And Chance, our producer, wants everybody to know to keep listening to Renegade Capital too. We'll keep giving you the tools and resources to keep opening your eyes and have that reset.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Renegade Capital. If you like what you heard, you can listen to previous episodes on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to follow us on social media at Renegade Capital, or check out our website, www.renegadecapitalpodcast.com, to never miss a new release. Our show is hosted by Andrea Longton, Ebony Perkins, and Leah Freemount, publicized by Elizabeth Gilbert Ketzel of Narrator Studios, and produced by yours truly, Chance Lee.